There are encounters that change nothing on the surface, yet alter everything beneath. Two people meet, exchange words that sound ordinary to anyone listening, and part ways. But something happened. Something rare. Something most people spend their entire lives searching for without knowing they're searching. When two awakened souls meet, the world doesn't announce it. There are no trumpets, no cosmic signs. Just a sudden stillness. A recognition that moves through the body like a remembered song from a life you're not sure you lived. You felt it, perhaps. That moment, when someone looks at you, and you realize they're not just looking at your face, your clothes, your social mask. They're seeing through all of it. And instead of feeling exposed, you feel for the first time in longer than you can remember, truly seen, truly met. It's terrifying. It's liberating. It's both. Most encounters in life are negotiations. We present versions of ourselves, carefully curated, socially acceptable. We read the room, adjust our energy, match the frequency of those around us. This isn't dishonesty, it's survival. It's how we move through a world that often punishes authenticity and rewards performance. But when two awakened souls meet, all of that falls away. There's no negotiation because there's nothing to negotiate. No performance because both have grown tired of performing. No masks because both have learned that masks, however beautiful, suffocate the face beneath them. This kind of meeting is rare, not because awakened souls are rare, though they are, but because even among the awakened, there's often a protective instinct to hide the light, to dim it, to make it more palatable for a world that prefers shadows to illumination. Thomas Merton understood this. The Trappist monk who spent years in silence, in contemplation, in the deep work of stripping away everything that wasn't essential, wrote about encounters that transcend ordinary human connection. He knew that true meeting requires more than physical presence. It requires the presence of the soul itself, unguarded, undefended, simply there. When two awakened souls meet, the first thing that happens is recognition. Not of the person, necessarily, but of the quality of their presence. It's like hearing your native language spoken in a foreign country. You don't know this person, but you know this language. The language of depth, of questioning, of having walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed, but transformed. This recognition is immediate and wordless. It happens before conversation, before explanation. It's a resonance, a tuning fork struck in one soul that vibrates in another. But here's what most people don't understand about such encounters. They're not always comfortable. They're not always blissful. Sometimes when two awakened souls meet, what happens is a mirror being held up with such clarity that you can't look away. And what you see in that mirror isn't always what you hope to see, because awakened doesn't mean perfected. It doesn't mean enlightened in the sense of having transcended all human struggle. It means awake to the struggle, conscious of the patterns, aware of the wounds, the defenses, the places where fear still holds territory. When two such people meet, they see in each other not just the light, but also the remaining shadows. And unlike most encounters, where we politely ignore the shadows or pretend they don't exist, awakened souls recognize them as part of the wholeness. The darkness isn't denied. It's acknowledged, held, sometimes even honored for the wisdom it carries. I once knew someone who described meeting another awakened soul as feeling like coming home and being exiled in the same moment. Coming home because, finally, there was someone who spoke the same language, who didn't need explanations for the inexplicable, who understood the loneliness of seeing what others don't see. Exiled because that very recognition highlighted every other relationship that lacked it, making the contrast almost unbearable. This is the paradox of such meetings. They illuminate not just the connection present, but the connection absent everywhere else. They show you what's possible, and in doing so they show you what you've been settling for. When two awakened souls meet, there's often a quality of timelessness. Hours pass like minutes. Silence sits comfortably between words. There's no rush to fill space with noise, no anxiety in the pauses. Each person trusts that what needs to be said will be said, and what needs to remain unspoken will be respected in its silence. This is because awakened souls have learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. They've sat with themselves long enough to know that not every void needs filling, not every question needs answering. They've made peace with mystery, with uncertainty, with the not knowing that terrifies those still clutching at certainty. So when they meet each other, they bring that peace, that capacity to be with what is rather than constantly grasping for what should be. But let's speak honestly about the challenges. Because there are challenges, and pretending otherwise would be to romanticize something that's actually quite raw and real. When two awakened souls meet, there can be an intensity that borders on overwhelming. Both are used to being the one who sees, the one who feels, the one who holds space for others. Suddenly, here's someone who needs no space held, who doesn't require careful handling, who won't break under the weight of truth. The temptation is to unload everything, to finally be able to speak without translation, without dilution, without fear of being too much. And this can be intoxicating. It can also be destabilizing. Because even awakened souls have limits. Even those who've walked through fire still carry tender places. The difference is, they know where those places are. They've mapped their own internal landscape, and when they meet another who's done the same, there's both the possibility of deep healing and the risk of old wounds reopening. I've seen it happen. Two people, both deeply conscious, both committed to truth, meet and recognize each other. The connection is immediate, powerful, undeniable. They dive deep, quickly, because both are capable of depth. But sometimes, the depth reveals incompatibilities that surface-level connection might have hidden. Sometimes the very clarity they both prize shows them that this meeting, however profound, isn't meant to become entanglement. And this is where the true wisdom of the awakened soul reveals itself, in the ability to honor the connection without needing to own it, to receive the gift of recognition without trying to cage it, to let the encounter be what it is, sacred, temporary, eternal in the moment, yet fluid in form. Most people, when they feel a profound connection, immediately want to define it. Relationship, friendship, something with boundaries, with expectations, with a future that can be planned. The ego wants certainty. It wants to know where it stands, what it can count on, how the story ends. But awakened souls have learned that the most profound connections often resist definition. They exist in a space beyond category, beyond the usual maps we use to navigate human relating. They're not less real for being undefinable. They're more real, because they're not bound by the constraints of conventional form. When two awakened souls meet, they might spend 3 hours together and never meet again, yet carry the imprint of that encounter for decades. Or they might become lifelong companions, walking parallel paths that occasionally intertwine. Or something in between, something entirely unique to them, something that doesn't have a name because it doesn't need one. The key is that both trust the organic unfolding. Both have learned to distinguish between ego's desire for possession and soul's capacity for presence. They can be fully present to each other in the moment without needing to grasp at the future or replay the past. This is rare, profoundly rare. Most human relating is driven by need. We need validation, security, distraction from our own emptiness. We need someone to fill the void, to make us feel whole, to prove that we're lovable, valuable enough. These needs aren't wrong, they're human. But they create relating that's more about extraction than exchange, more about taking than receiving. When two awakened souls meet, the quality of exchange shifts. It's not that they have no needs, they do. But they've learned to meet many of their own needs, to parent their own inner child, to soothe their own nervous system. They come to the encounter not from depletion, but from fullness, not grasping but offering. And what they offer each other is the rarest gift, permission to be authentic. In most interactions, we spend enormous energy managing other people's perceptions of us. We modulate our intensity, soften our edges, translate our truth into something more digestible. We do this automatically, often unconsciously. It's the cost of admission to social spaces. But when two awakened souls meet, this exhausting dance ends. Both can drop the management. Both can speak from the place that's usually hidden, protected, kept safe from a world that might misunderstand or misuse it. And in that dropping in that release of the protective mechanisms we've carried for so long, something extraordinary happens. We remember what it feels like to be human without the armor, vulnerable without being defenseless, open without being naive. This is what Merton was pointing to, this quality of encounter where two people meet not as concepts, not as roles, not as projections, but as presences, where the meeting itself becomes a form of prayer, a form of meditation, a form of recognition that what's deepest in one is also what's deepest in the other. But here's the thing that makes such meetings so piercing. They're often brief, not because they lack depth, but because depth is difficult to sustain in a world designed for surface-level interaction. The world pulls us back. Responsibilities, obligations, the sheer momentum of our ordinary lives. We return to contexts where no one speaks this language, where this level of presence is neither expected nor understood, and returning can feel like a kind of death. You've tasted something real, something you didn't even know you were hungry for. And now you're back in a world of substitutes, food that doesn't nourish, conversation that doesn't satisfy, connection that doesn't truly connect. This is why some awakened souls, after meeting each other, pull back, not because the connection wasn't real, but because it was too real. Because maintaining that level of authenticity in all their other relationships becomes impossible once they've experienced what's possible. The contrast is too stark. The ordinary becomes unbearable. Yet there's another possibility, another way of carrying these encounters. What if the meeting of awakened souls isn't meant to create permanent partnership, but to serve as a reminder, a touchstone, a proof of concept that yes, this kind of connection exists, which means it's possible not just with this one person, but as a quality of being we can cultivate in ourselves and offer to the world? What if every encounter with another awakened soul is teaching us not to cling to that specific person, but to embody more fully the qualities that made the meeting possible in the first place? Presence, authenticity, courage, vulnerability without collapse. When two awakened souls meet and then part, they don't return to their lives unchanged. They carry forward the vibration of that meeting, and in carrying it forward, they become beacons for other awakened souls. They signal, often wordlessly, "I'm here. I speak this language. You're not alone." This is how the awakened find each other, not through searching, but through resonance. Not through effort, but through simply being who they are, openly, consistently, regardless of who's watching. And sometimes, the greatest gift of meeting another awakened soul isn't the connection itself, but what it reveals about our capacity for connection. It shows us that we're capable of deeper relating than we thought, that our inner world, which often feels so isolating, so strange, so impossible to share, can actually be shared, can actually be met. This knowledge changes us. It softens something in the heart that had hardened in protection. It opens a door we'd closed because no one had ever knocked in quite the right way. I've watched people transform after such meetings, not because they stayed in contact with the person they met, but because the meeting shattered an assumption they didn't know they held, that no one would ever truly see them, that they would always, on some level, be alone. Once that assumption breaks, once you know through direct experience that you can be seen, held, understood, the way you move through the world shifts. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop dimming your light to match the room's comfort level. You stop translating yourself into something more palatable. Not because you become arrogant or indifferent to others, but because you've tasted authentic connection, and you understand now that authentic connection requires authenticity, not performance. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of such encounters, that being truly met requires the courage to show up as we truly are, and most of us are terrified to do this because we've been hurt when we've tried. We've been rejected, misunderstood, pathologized, or dismissed. But when two awakened souls meet, they create a sanctuary where that risk becomes safe again. They demonstrate through their presence that yes, you can be this honest, this vulnerable, this real, and not only survive it, but be celebrated for it. And even if that encounter is brief, even if you never see that person again, you carry forward the evidence, the lived experience that it's possible, that somewhere in this world, someone speaks your language, And if one person does, others must too. This is why such meetings matter so profoundly. Not because they solve loneliness, they don't, not permanently, but because they interrupt the story that loneliness tells, which is that we're fundamentally alone because we're fundamentally wrong, too much, too different, too strange. The meeting of awakened souls says, you're not wrong, you're awake. And being awake in a sleeping world will always feel isolating until you meet others who are also awake. But they exist, and you just proved it. There's a particular kind of grief that follows these encounters. Not the grief of ending necessarily, but the grief of recognition, the grief of realizing how much time you've spent settling for less, how many conversations you've had that touched nothing real, how many connections you've maintained that required you to abandon yourself. This grief is part of the awakening process itself. It's the sorrow of seeing clearly what you couldn't see before, and it's painful, but it's also sacred. Because it means you're no longer willing to betray yourself for the comfort of others. You're no longer willing to pretend that shallow is enough when you've touched depth. When two awakened souls meet, they give each other permission to grieve this. They create space for the sorrow of consciousness, the loneliness of perception, the exhaustion of seeing what others refuse to see. They don't try to fix it or minimize it. They hold it as you'd hold water in cupped hands, gently, respectfully, knowing it will eventually flow through but honoring it while it's present. And in that holding, something transforms. The grief doesn't disappear, but it becomes bearable. Because it's shared. Because someone else knows. Because you're not crazy for feeling what you feel, seeing what you see, knowing what you know. This validation is profound. Not validation in the shallow sense of someone agreeing with everything you say, but validation in the deeper sense of someone confirming that yes, this path exists. These experiences are real. This level of consciousness is possible, and you're not imagining it. For someone who's been walking this path alone, often doubting their own perception, often wondering if they're overthinking or being too sensitive or expecting too much, this confirmation is like water in a desert. It revives something that was withering from lack of recognition. But let's be clear about something important. The meeting of awakened souls isn't about finding your other half. It's not about completion or rescue or finally being fixed by someone who understands you. Awakened souls don't complete each other. They witness each other. They reflect each other. They remind each other of what's possible when two people choose presence over pretense. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. The ego wants completion. It wants someone to fill what's missing, to provide what it lacks. But the awakened soul knows it's already whole. It's not looking for completion. It's looking for companionship on a path that few are walking. When two awakened souls meet, they're not merging into one. They're standing side by side, both complete unto themselves, both capable of solitude, both committed to their own journey. But for this moment, for however long the encounter lasts, they walk together. They share the road. They speak the unspoken things. And when they part, whether for a day, a year, or forever, both continue on their paths, changed by the encounter, but not diminished by the separation. This is spiritual maturity, the capacity to receive deeply without grasping, to connect fully without clinging, to love without needing to own. Most of us have been trained in a different model of connection, one based on possession, permanence, and promise. We meet someone significant, and we immediately start building a future around them. We make them essential to our happiness, central to our identity. We wrap our sense of self around the connection until we can't tell where we end and they begin. But awakened souls have usually learned, often through painful experience, that this kind of enmeshment isn't love. It's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of losing what we found. Fear of returning to the emptiness we felt before this person arrived. So when two awakened souls meet, they practice a different kind of relating. One that honors the connection without making it a prison. One that celebrates the present without demanding a future. One that recognizes that all encounters, no matter how profound, are temporary in form, even if eternal in essence. This doesn't make the connection less valuable. It makes it more valuable. because it's freed from the burden of having to be anything other than what it is right now. Right now, in this moment, two souls are meeting, recognizing each other, speaking truth, sharing presence. This is enough. This is everything. The moment doesn't need to promise anything beyond itself to be complete. And paradoxically, it's precisely this freedom from grasping that allows the deepest intimacy. When neither person is trying to secure the future, both can be fully present to the now. When neither is performing to maintain the connection, both can show up as they actually are. This is the gift and the teaching of such encounters. They show us what becomes possible when we release our death grip on outcomes and simply allow what is to be what it is. In the end, when two awakened souls meet, what happens is both simple and mysterious. They see each other. They recognize the light that consciousness brings. They honor the wounds that walking this path creates. They offer each other the rare gift of not having to explain, defend, or dilute themselves. And then, whether they stay or go, whether they meet again or never again, they carry forward the proof that authentic meeting is possible. That depth can be shared, that they're not alone in their awakening, even if they spend most of their time in spaces where no one else is awake. This knowledge changes everything. It doesn't eliminate the loneliness of consciousness, but it transforms it from a prison into a landscape that occasionally contains others traveling the same terrain. And perhaps that's all we can ask for. Not constant companionship in awakening, but the occasional encounter that reminds us why we chose to wake up in the first place, why we continue to walk this path even when it would be easier to go back to sleep. We walk it because we've tasted what's possible when two awakened souls meet, and having tasted it, we can't pretend anymore. We can't settle for less. We can't return to the comfortable numbness of unconscious living, so we walk on. And we trust that the path will bring us what we need when we need it. Another awakened soul when the loneliness becomes too heavy. A moment of recognition when doubt creeps in. A reminder, delivered in human form, that we chose rightly when we chose awareness over comfort, truth over belonging, presence over performance. This is the secret meaning of such encounters. They're not the destination. They're signposts. They're not the answer. They're confirmation that we're asking the right questions. And in a world that often rewards sleep, that's everything. There's something else that happens when two awakened souls meet, a phenomenon of mutual acceleration. Each person walking their path alone moves at a certain pace, but when they come together, even briefly, the pace quickens. It's as if each sees in the other possibilities they hadn't yet imagined for themselves. This is different from the teacher-student dynamic. When two awakened souls meet, wisdom flows in both directions simultaneously. Each is both teacher and student. They begin talking, and within minutes, they're in territory neither has explored alone. They're mapping new internal landscape together, discovering doorways that only appeared because both were present simultaneously. But this catalytic potential carries danger. The rapid expansion of awareness can become intoxicating. We start to believe that this person is necessary for our continued growth. We forget that they're a catalyst, not the source. When the encounter ends, as most do, we can find ourselves in withdrawal. Not just missing the person, but missing the pace of growth we experienced in their presence. This is where discernment becomes crucial. The awakened soul must learn to distinguish between the gift of mutual catalysis and the trap of dependency, because the acceleration isn't actually coming from the other person. It's coming from something the encounter activates within each person. The other soul is a mirror, a resonator, a permission slip to access what was already present but dormant. So when we part from such an encounter, we're not losing access to something external. We're being invited to maintain access to what was awakened in us. This is the maturation process. First, we experience something profound in the presence of another. Then we learn to sustain that quality of awareness on our own. Let's talk about the shadow side of these encounters. When two awakened souls meet, they're not just bringing light to light, they're also bringing shadow to shadow. And sometimes what gets illuminated isn't beautiful. Sometimes it's the places where we're still asleep pretending to be awake. Another awakened soul sees through this. They know the difference between true awakening and spiritual performance because they've performed the same show. And so these encounters can become mirrors that show us not just our light, but our remaining delusions. This is uncomfortable. We thought we'd transcended ego, moved beyond judgment, released attachment. But another awakened soul with their clear seeing reveals that transcendence is never complete, that ego is endlessly subtle. It requires tremendous courage to stay present when another awakened soul is reflecting your shadow back to you. And when two awakened souls can do this for each other, hold both the light and the shadow with equal honoring, something extraordinary happens. They create a container for transformation that's rare and precious. This is unconditional presence. The willingness to see all of what is, without flinching, without fixing, without turning away. Most people can't offer this, but awakened souls, having walked through their own darkness, can offer this presence to each other. When two people can offer each other this level of presence, even briefly, it changes the template for what's possible in human relating. It shows that we don't have to choose between authenticity and connection, between honesty and kindness, between seeing clearly and loving fully. This is the hope such encounters offer. Not the false hope that we'll find someone who makes life easy, but the real hope that we can meet life's difficulty with another person who's equally committed to staying awake through it. When two awakened souls meet, they offer each other this companionship. They say wordlessly, "I know this path is difficult. I know consciousness brings as much sorrow as joy. I know that seeing clearly doesn't mean feeling good, but I'm here. I'm walking it too. You're not alone." And that simple recognition that someone else is walking the same path, paying the same price, staying awake despite the cost, sustains us through the periods where we wonder if awakening was worth it. In those moments, the memory of having met another awakened soul becomes a lifeline. Proof that we're not crazy. Proof that this path, though difficult, is real. Proof that somewhere in the world, someone else chose awakening over comfort and is still choosing it. This is the final gift of such encounters. They become reference points, anchors in the landscape of consciousness. When doubt arises, we remember. We remember that moment when two souls recognized each other. We remember what was possible in that recognition. The meeting of awakened souls isn't a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's a recurring gift, offered whenever we're ready to receive it. Our task isn't to seek them desperately or to cling when they appear. Our task is to remain open, to stay present, to keep walking our path with enough authenticity that when another awakened soul crosses our path, recognition is possible. This is the practice. Not seeking awakened souls, but becoming so fully ourselves that we naturally attract those who operate at the same frequency. Not performing awakeness, but embodying it so completely that others who've done the same can sense it without words. And when the meeting happens, we practice presence. We practice letting it be what it is. We practice receiving without grasping, connecting without clinging, loving without needing to possess. We practice trusting that every encounter, no matter how profound, is temporary in form. That people come into our lives for reasons we may never fully understand, stay for exactly as long as they're meant to, and leave when their presence has served its purpose. This is what happens when two awakened souls meet. Everything and nothing, a moment outside of time, a recognition that changes everything, a gift that asks nothing in return except that we remain true to the path it illuminates. Two awakened souls meet. They recognize each other. They illuminate possibilities neither could see alone. They part. And both continue walking, forever marked by the encounter, forever grateful for the gift of having been truly seen, truly met, truly witnessed in the fullness of their being. This is enough. This is everything. We remember. We were seen. We were met. We were not alone. And knowing this, we walk on.